Hello everybody, and thank you so much for logging into this final session that I'll be chairing today, when we're going to be looking at how to build a modern workplace, which sounds fairly crucial. And also, very interesting conversation now, I think, after the COVID lockdown has made us realize that everything we used to take for granted about how a workplace had to be has kind of been thrown out of the window, really. So I'm Leslie Stones. I'm a freelance journalist with Brainstorm magazine, which is a partner for Eltron's Technology Day. And with me, I am delighted to have Basha Pillay, who is the head of modern platform for Eltron Carabina. And that's a title that encompasses the cloud and all sorts of other digital wizardry. Now, change and evolution have become kind of a constant companion for any successful business these days, and also for the technologies that actually underpin them. And obviously the COVID crisis really showed us our complete dependency on robust IT systems when we all had to work at home. But at the same time, the lockdown made us think about the way we did things. Were we doing things because that's the way we've always done them? Are they really the best way? Is this what we need to be doing going forward? I'm sure things are going to change dramatically after the whole lockdown, and people have just reevaluated what we actually need in the workplace. So Basha's going to talk to us about that for a few minutes, and then we're going to have time for questions. So please do get involved. Pop your questions and your comments on the app, because you're the people that actually have to work in a corporate environment and define how it looks. So Basha, will you talk to us about building a modern workplace?
Thank you, Leslie. As mentioned, my name is Basha Pillay, and what I'd like to do over the next 20 minutes or so is really just share some insights, some recommendations, and some key perspectives on what does it mean to build a modern workplace. But before we go down there, as alluded to by Leslie, I think it's key that we reflect on what's happened over the last 6 months. COVID and this pandemic has absolutely had an impact on what we see as the modern workplace, what it comprises of, and how we will make it, or how we will operationalize it going forward. Now, I have no doubt that we will continue to see the impact that this pandemic has had on us for years to come. But there are a few things that we know already. Our environment has absolutely changed. And yes, it has had quite a few negative implications. Our streets are empty. We have a number of businesses that have been, unfortunately, had to close their doors. Job losses and unemployment is at an all-time high. But there are some silver linings there as well. What we're seeing is there's a number of new business models and businesses that are essentially reinventing themselves on the back of the crisis that we're currently in. If you think back to a few years back, we saw in the last financial or global financial crisis that we had, we saw organizations like Uber, Airbnb, and Netflix essentially explode into our market. My view is in a few years from now, we're going to have the same conversation about organizations that have reinvented themselves in this current crisis. Our behavior has fundamentally changed. Today, wearing a mask is second nature. It's as easy as I need to put on my shoes to go out, I need to put on a mask to go out. Coupled with that, the fact that every single public property will now require us to screen, to wear masks, and to check temperature, I believe is going to be a routine for us going forward. Our buying behavior has changed as consumers as well. Some of us were quite familiar with the concept of online shopping and door-to-door delivery, but you can't deny that over this last 6 months, we've seen an exponential growth in these two industries. What does it actually mean? Essentially, the way we deliver services to our customers on the back of the current situation is going to differentiate us from our competitors. Our risks has also fundamentally changed. From an environmental perspective, sanitization and social distancing has become a norm and a necessity for society to function. But there's other inherent risks that we're starting to see come into the environment. Since the pandemic has hit our shores, we've seen a 3 to 5 times escalation in terms of the number of cyber attacks that we've experienced on our shores. And probably the biggest impact that we've seen and the biggest change that we've seen is the way that we work and the way that we will work going forward. I honestly believe that we will never go back to a norm in terms of how we used to work pre-COVID, and that's really where I want to focus our discussion on today. What does it mean in terms of some of the metrics and statistics that are coming out of our partners? What does it mean for building out your workplace strategy? What does it mean in terms of executing on the strategy going forward? Now, whether you call it a modern workplace, a work from home, a work-life balance, the fact of the matter is this is a conversation we've been having for many, many years with our customers. The fundamental difference to why it's become such a topical area at the moment is just because of the need for the accelerated transformation from our clients. I think it's best encapsulated by a quote that Satya Nadella recently said, where he talked around the fact that in the last 2 years, we've seen, or rather in the last 2 months, we've seen 2 years worth of digital transformation. In my mind, I think we're going to continue to see this momentum going forward. Now, there's one word that for me resonates in terms of why are we seeing this dire need for organizations to want to digitally transform, and that's resilience. It's about survival of the fittest. It's about being able to differentiate your organization in these difficult times. It's about attracting new digital skills in order to innovate and create new solutions that you take out to market. Now, why don't we look at some of the metrics that have come out over the last 6 months, and specifically, what does it say about the way we're working and how we should be working going forward? This first metric was quite an interesting one. It essentially showed the impact of technology as various countries started moving into their state of lockdown. As you can see, there was an exponential growth in terms of the adoption of technology in relation to organizations and countries as they moved into a lockdown state. This increase in adoption was predominantly based on cloud technologies, public cloud technologies, and services and solutions out of these public cloud providers. The demand was actually so great that at one point, large hyperscalers like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon actually ran out of capacity and storage across their data centers globally. They literally had to institute emergency measures in order to ship new equipment across to their data centers to cope with both the storage and the capacity that was needed going forward. From a solutions perspective, we saw it fairly concentrated on aspects of remote communication, collaboration, tools like Zoom and Team, which has seen a fundamental growth over this last 6 months. How big a growth are we talking about? If we have to take Microsoft Teams, we've shown that in just a 2-week period, in terms of remote meetings and access to meetings, we went from a daily average of about 560 million minutes spent a day to 2.7 billion minutes a day spent in meetings over a 2-week period. Now, what does that mean? So yes, as we went into the state of lockdown, a lot of us scored some hours in terms of not being able to sit in traffic for 2 hours or commuting to work. But what we also noticed was that there was a sudden increase in the number of virtual meetings that we were being asked to actually participate in. So there was an extension of the work environment in order to increase productivity during a very trying and difficult time. Coupled with this, we also saw an increase in the use of video. For many of us, it was the only way that we could deal with the isolation of being in lockdown and engaging with people outside of the circle of our families. So video and video technologies has seen a 2 times increase, both in terms of how meetings were being dealt with, as well as one-on-one engagements. And we saw some pretty creative ways in which people were actually using this video technologies. The innovation that's happened just within the video space over the last 6 months has been incredible. Just recently, Microsoft released something which they've called Together Mode. Essentially what they've done is using AI technologies. They're able to extract individuals out of their individual videos and put them together in a virtual environment, whether that be an auditorium, a boardroom, or even a school. The innovation has created such a stir that just recently, the NBA has announced a partnership with Microsoft where they're using Together Mode to actually redefine how fans are actually watching matches. So now, today, if you're watching an NBA match, you can actually watch it together in a virtual environment. Probably one of the most important outputs that's come out of this last 6 months is our preparation from a cybersecurity perspective as we shifted to this remote way of working. I should rather say our unpreparedness in terms of this aspect. When BitClass launched their remote workplace security report, it was quite staggering that 70% of respondents said that they were either moderately prepared or not prepared at all. Unfortunately, many organizations looked at cybersecurity purely from a perimeter perspective and purely from the confines of their current office or campus environment. In this day and age, that's just not something to do. If we couple the fact that such a big amount of participants were not ready from a cybersecurity perspective, and you couple it with the fact that as South Africa, we are high up on the list of countries from a attack vector perspective, you can understand why we've seen this dramatic increase in cyber attacks in our environment. Organizations need to look at security in a fundamentally different way. It's about looking at your network, your user, your device, and your data collectively from a security perspective, and understanding all of those aspects combined to understand what your security posture is at any one point. A very recent metric, which I think was quite telling, is now talking to the burnout factor we've seen as all of us went into a remote working way of work. Already we're seeing over 30% of remote workers talking about the fact that they are feeling burnout on the back of the extension of work hours, on the back of the high demand from a productivity perspective. And I personally know of about 3 individuals that actually had to be hospitalized on the back of stress-related ailments during these very trying times. Now, outside of looking at the metrics over the last 6 months, I think it's quite imperative that we take a larger view of some of the trends and shifts that we've seen from a people, process, and technology perspective when related to the modern workplace and how it will actually influence the way that you will build out the strategy going forward. Let's look at people first. From a people perspective, we've seen this fundamental shift from actually looking and measuring individuals to rather focusing on teams, small, agile, iterative teams that are a combination of a number of unique digital skill sets. As I showed earlier, there's definitely a move away from just looking at productivity in isolation, but rather focusing more on the well-being of your employees. As we all traverse through this new global recession, it's become more than just efficiency and cost saving. Resilience is absolutely going to be key in terms of how organizations are going to survive. What does it mean from a people perspective? It's being able to retain your top digital skills in order to innovate in this very trying environment. We know that the office is no longer a place of work. The extension of people working from anywhere is going to be a fundamental aspect of any workplace strategy going forward. We are actually seeing a complete turnaround in terms of a number of organizations opting out of their office leases and rather looking at remote working and new ways of measurement in terms of going forward. And finally, as we've seen a number of organizations reduce their employee base, going forward, we are going to be seeing a shift where the aspect of full-time workers is no longer going to be viable. Organizations are going to opt for actually procuring digital skills on demand. So this concept of contingent workers in a gig economy is going to become more and more relevant. Now, we know that there's been huge job losses, and we know that a number of people has been retrenched. This is actually an opportunity where individuals can start reinventing themselves with new digital skills in order to be relevant in this new modern workplace. Just recently, Microsoft announced a program where between Microsoft Learning, LinkedIn, and GitHub, they have launched a program where they are going to look at essentially developing 25 million individuals over the next year with digital skills for this new world. From a process perspective, it's really the shift away from these long, drawn-out projects to a more agile and iterative approach using things like DevOps methodologies. When you look at how they're going to be building new products and services, there's a shift away from having these small little R&D teams who are focusing on what's next. We're seeing a big growth around this concept that they call citizen developers. The concept here is that those that are closest to the problem are most applicable to solving those problems. So using things like low-code, no-code platforms, we are seeing these citizen developers actually solve for themselves, create new projects and new solutions, and work within other departments, within other companies, and also partnerships. From an efficiency perspective, organizations are moving to try and automate as much as possible. With some of the next generation tools that we have, it's quite easy to digitize and automate processes. Even looking at legacy systems that maybe previously could not be converted or migrated, the innovation and what sits in these new generation tools, we can actually use AI to pick up screen positioning and keyboard actions on legacy systems and still integrate it into a fully automated digital process. As I mentioned earlier, this concept of low-code, no-code is having a fundamental growth across all organizations that we're engaging with. If you look at Microsoft's Power Platform and how that is enabling the next generation of developers, be it citizen developers or your traditional development environments that require heavy integration into back-end systems. And then finally, with the advent of bots and digital agents, we are seeing this aspect of hyper-personalization for employees in terms of how they engage with the company's systems and services from within. Finally, from a technology perspective, there's a shift away from having multiple technologies and end users having to use multiple solutions in order to facilitate their day-to-day work. It's all about reduction in complexity. It's all about consolidation in terms of what end users need to engage with. So gone are the days where you're going to need 5 to 10 different solutions in order to do your job. What we've seen is the shift to move into a single platform that unlocks a number of features and functionality that end users need natively, and then through intelligent integration enables more custom solutions on the back of that. Microsoft Teams is a perfect example of a platform for the future. In the platform, you have essentially your productivity tools, your collaboration tools, your telephony tools, all in a secure environment that end users can then engage with. If you add to that the fact that you can now add custom apps, custom processes, and change the way that you fundamentally operate, this is where the technology aspect is going. The key thing there, though, is it needs to be secure and it needs to be a differentiated experience for end users. In summary, what I want to do is leave you with 7 takeaways that I believe is fundamental in terms of how you build out this new modern workplace and how it should be looked at given the current situation that we sit in. Number 1, reimagine your organizational culture and social capital, but do it with a digital lens. Understand what you've got in terms of investments that you can leverage and use in this capacity, and then identify the gaps and figure out what additional investments you need to make. 2, your biggest asset today is still your people. Prioritize on their well-being. There's some small things that you can do that allow you to keep your finger on the pulse and understand what the state of well-being of your organization is at any one point. As we move into the state of remote working, it's very easy to lose contact with the fact that these are individuals and they can be seen as a data point or a number. Well-being of our employees is going to be a high priority, and if done correctly, things like productivity and innovation will automatically come through. 3, learning and development, as it's always been, is still absolutely relevant in this new working world. The difference we're seeing today is that it's not isolated to your IT team or your development team. Every single person in an organization needs to have some form of digital skill. If done correctly, you can then take these people and put them in synergistic teams to create new ways of working. Number 4, data is still your best currency for making decisions as a business. Unlock as much data as you can from within your organization. And don't keep it confined to just management and how management uses data. We're seeing more and more that individuals, when given data around their own behavior, use it to self-manage themselves. 5, automate, automate, automate. When you look at platforms like Power Platform, use these platforms to very quickly and iteratively change some of the cumbersome processes that sit within your organization and digitize them. Use the citizen developers that sits within your organization to build out new innovations and new ways of work. 6, if we look at things like collaboration and innovation, these are embedded within our culture. So when you're building out the strategy, be sure to be inclusive of everyone within the organization, not just on the execution, but also how you build the strategy. And then finally, don't just look at an employee experience in isolation. With all of the factors and risks that are currently around us today, make sure it's a trusted, secure, modern experience for every employee. Now, as Eltron, we've put together a few offerings that we feel can help you in terms of kickstarting your journey, in terms of how you build out your modern workplace. What does it consist of? So a couple of these I've just highlighted now. So if you look at the team's custom solutions, we can help you leverage your existing investment in teams by unlocking additional innovation. We can look at things like how you can actually consolidate your PABX systems into Teams and use Teams as your primary telephony system. We're currently working with a number of clients where we're unlocking old legacy solutions and software and actually lifting it up into Teams in new ways of how we're doing things. Integration into existing backend ERP and CRM systems. If we look at App in a Day and Dashboard in a Day, these are 2 Microsoft certified training that will allow you to really leverage how Power Platform can change and digitize the way you go forward. From a solutions assessment perspective, we are approved to run a number of funded Microsoft solution assessments as well as our own. We will look at everything from how do we identify what infrastructure you have that you want to move to cloud? How do we look at teamwork from within your environment? How do we look at change and adoption? And then probably most fundamental is how can we run an assessment on your cybersecurity posture from an end-to-end perspective? And then finally, we do have a Office 365 health check that we can give. It is a free offering. Essentially, what it allows you to do is have a view of the state of your current Office 365 environment from a license optimization, from a security scoring, how are you consuming and adopting the technology? And then we deliver it to you in the form of a report, and from there, it can kick off additional actions from your side. With that in mind, I'd like to say thank you for giving me this time, and I'll hand over back to Leslie to answer some of your questions.
Well, I was hoping you'd do the answering, Basha. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that. We've got a few minutes, so if you have any questions, please do whiz them through. You've raised a lot of points there that I want to take you up on. So I'm going to, first of all, are people actually going to go back to the physical offices, or are you talking about a place now where home working is is going to stay? Are people going back yet? Or
I don't believe so. I think we've gone past the point where we're going to go back to a way of normal working. Yes, we've been forced into it. I mean, we've been having these conversations with clients for a number of years in terms of enabling remote ways of working. We've been forced into it, and I think what's happened is a number of our customers are actually seeing the benefits out of it. Why do they have to pay large amounts of money for these big flashy offices when they can get the same output out of their people? And as long as there's a sense of trust and probably new ways of measurement, absolutely, I think this concept of remote working is going to be a growth area for many years to come.
So all those glorious, shiny buildings, didn't need those?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I actually think there's an opening for property owners to reinvent themselves. When I talk around organizations that need to reinvent themselves, I mean, there's no reason why, those can't be changed into, the kind of Regis type of models where it's an office on demand and rather, change the way that those commercial models work.
Yeah. But another thing you mentioned is the employee burnouts. And when I first started working at home, I did find that because I wasn't in an office, there was an expectation that Leslie's going to be slacking off a bit. And now that the boundaries have blurred between home life and work life, because we are now working from home, we're living at work, are there some technologies or is it just practices that people have to put in place so that we don't end up worse off than we were before because we can answer that email at midnight?
I think it's a combination of technologies, to your point. And I think what we see now is organizations are realizing that they need to be enabling their employees to work remotely. So a simple thing like connectivity at home, that should become part of your employee contract going forward. Having the right connectivity, having the right security in place to enable it. Not all of us have the space to have an office at home. So it's more than just working from home, but also working remotely. And that's where I said, property owners could absolutely look at it. Yeah. Coupled with that, we need to change the way we look at certain processes. We as Eltron saw the exact same impact where we were starting to feel burnout across the entire organization. So we started instituting some new processes. And the idea there is you need to be agile enough to measure continuously. And as you see the outcomes of the measurement, iteratively change things within the organization. So
how do you measure whether Basha's
that's a good point.
Feeling a bit iffy?
It's actually not as complex as you think. What we've done is we actually run a weekly pulse survey where we simply send a survey to our employees. And it's a simple thing. It's a smiley face. Is it a medium face or is it a sad face? Something as simple like that can give you an immediate sense of, is it across the entire organization? Is it one or two individuals? Is it continuous over the last couple of weeks that we need to maybe take some action there on that end? Our HR department has been great. They've just recently instituted something that they've called no internal meetings Wednesdays. Just because we were being, just inundated with the amount of virtual meetings. Yeah. So we've started creating a new behavior to say on Wednesdays, we'll focus on ourselves, we'll focus on some of the activities that we need to do. And as far as possible, try not to put any internal meetings between people.
Okay, so it's a matter of people changing their mindset as much as the technologies. But on the technology front, has the software packages that we've got, do they give us the options to do everything that you're talking about we should be doing or would be good to do? Or do companies have to do a lot of tweaking when they've got a package in to make it fit what they want to do? Or do they end up just actually cramming their work processes into what the software will let them?
I think it's fundamentally based on just how mature an organization is in terms of their cloud journey. So I can tell you that those organizations that have adopted cloud solutions have found it far easier to transition into this new world. Why? Because once you're in the cloud, it's very quick for large organizations like a Microsoft to change the dynamic of their own solutions to meet the requirements that we currently sit under. When you've got your own archaic legacy systems in your offices and your data centers, it becomes all that much more difficult for you to change it in order to suit the new ways of working. So I mean, if you look at the Teams platform, from when we started in the lockdown to what it looks like today, there's well over 100 new iterations of changes that have actually come through that platform in order to accommodate what users are asking in terms of this new way of working.
Okay, goodness. And the Power Platform that you were talking about, is that a new package that we have to bring in, or is that just using the stuff you've already got smarter?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. You know, I didn't think it was going to take off as much as it did when it initially came out. It essentially what it is the ability for you and I, without having any kind of dev background, being able to build and digitize processes in the form of an app, you know, automating a workflow behind it and creating a whole process that's completely digitized that wasn't there before. So we are seeing organizations actually apply it in very different ways. You know, if I look at one of our financial services clients, they've adopted it to its full degree. In fact, what they've done is they've created a center of excellence that's focused on driving governance and policies and best practice in terms of how they do it. And they're actually enabling citizen developers within their entire organization. Just in the last year, they built over 700 Power Apps that has changed the way that organization operates internally.
And it's working, I assume.
It is working. We've seen a massive growth in this space. Yeah. Some organizations are still dipping their feet and trying to test out, which is absolutely great. You know, I think the key there is choose something that's relevant, see if this platform works for you, and make sure that you're measuring the output of what this can do for you. But it is something that we see in a massive growth in.
Okay, I've got two issues I want to ask you about. First of all, I want to ask about security. So you've got all this stuff now in the cloud. You've got people working from home with their own laptops, their own cell phones that they've brought onto the company network. They haven't really been, you know, classified, but they're on there anyway. And the risk must be enormous. You were talking obviously about the need to take security more seriously, but how are we placed in South Africa? Have we been a bit lax towards that? Or?
I do believe that we've probably taken it for granted. I mean, as you saw in the stat that I showed earlier, the fact that 70% of participants were moderately or not there, I think we've kind of taken it for granted. You know, the problem is we were quite cushy in our offices and we looked at security from a perimeter. So as far as I was concerned, as long as you're secure within my environment, I don't really have to focus on what you do outside of that.
But now your environment's moved with you.
Correct. Yeah. That's no longer a factor. And extension of elements like the network, the device, the user, and the data from a zero trust perspective is what organizations are kind of grappling with at the moment. My advice is first and foremost, understand what your current state looks like. So run assessment, understand where your gaps are. I mean, we've seen, even with large multinationals who thought that they had actually covered all their bases, you know, on the back of some of the assessments that we did with them, it was quite shocking to see that they still had gaps that essentially made them vulnerable from an attack perspective as well.
Have you been out there hacking, Basha?
No. The only thing I've been hacking is my lawn because we couldn't have our gardeners there for a number of people.
And skills. I mean, you've got a bunch more stuff in the cloud. You've got people working in areas where there is not much connectivity. There's a tendency, there's a risk it could all fall to pieces, isn't there? How much skill do you need for this? I mean, do we have the skills in South Africa to support this remote working, work from anywhere, work from any place, any time?
Yeah, I do think it's a big challenge. It's also a big opportunity. You know, if we look at what I mentioned earlier in terms of the announcement that Microsoft made around essentially enabling 25 million globally from a digital skills perspective. You know, we need more organizations, including ourselves, to start moving and using the opportunity of the fact that, you know, we do have such a big unemployment rate. But if we enable these people with the right digital skills, it's not necessarily that we need to employ them full time. But we can start looking at this concept of procuring a skill on demand. And I think that's where we need to be moving from in a skills.
But do those skills even exist on demand, or is there?
No. Yes and no, right? I mean, there are a number of platforms that you can go and skill yourself up as an individual. But does everyone have access to these platforms? Does everyone have access to connectivity? No. So I think we need to fundamentally shift the way we think about how we enable our people in South Africa And it's incumbent upon large organizations like ourselves to do our part in that process as well.
But it's also a great opportunity for any sort of go-getting individual now to see the gap here and skill themselves.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think you're going to see more niche-focused digital skills and the demand for those niche skills, like security.
Yeah.
You know, if I was an individual that was currently sitting at home and maybe had access to some platforms, I'd go and skill myself in cybersecurity and understanding what the new world looks like from a cybersecurity perspective.
And you can get that training for free now.
There are platforms where you can, and you know there are some paid versions, but there are definitely platforms where you can leverage that skill for free.
Brilliant! That sounds like a great opportunity, actually. There was a question I wanted to ask. Yeah, we've got a question here. Did I understand correctly that Microsoft Teams is one of the best options for a single platform option? Is that someone being cynical? I don't know. What do you think?
No, it absolutely is. If you look at the strategy from Microsoft, I mean, the fact that they've already seen Microsoft Teams as their fastest growing product ever, like since Microsoft themselves was set up as an organization. The thing you need to understand is, why would you want to have everything sitting in a single platform? We've seen across organizations, as you start rolling out new software and new services, your biggest problem there is actually the adoption from an end user perspective. So you've got a platform that's already been heavily adopted by your entire organization. As individuals, we've all started feeling this app fatigue. You know, we don't use half of the apps that sits on our phone. So how do you give me a platform that gives me what I need when I need it? And as times change, so too does the features and functions within that platform. So yes, I do believe that Microsoft Teams, and if you look at the strategy from a Microsoft perspective, they are actually centering their whole new way of working around Teams. So I do believe it is the way to go. And
in general, would you say that we have as much software and capabilities as we need to actually to make this reality? Companies aren't going to be saying, I would do this if only I had the available kit.
Yeah,
we're getting what we need.
I do believe so. I think it's more, to your earlier point, it's a mindset change, you know. It's a mindset change in terms of procuring software in an OpEx model versus a CapEx model. It's a mindset change in terms of, you know, getting over that whole aspect of, do I trust that my data is sitting in the cloud? Do I trust these cloud providers to do the best that they can for me? So once you get over those barriers, absolutely the services are there. I mean, 2 of the big hyperscalers have got local data centers. That in itself should say that if an organization isn't thinking about cloud or adopting cloud solutions today, I'm afraid they are in very big trouble in the current situation.
Okay, brilliant. Well, we've just about run out of time on that one. So, and it's also a matter of trust from the company, isn't it? To trust that Basha isn't at home tackling his lawn. He's actually doing something useful. So it's a mindset change. It's a technology change. It's a security change. It's a bandwidth change. It's a skills change.
It's a change.
It's a change.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, brilliant. Well, I know that Basha's going to be absolutely delighted to follow up with you offline afterwards if you want some help in making sure that you're building a modern workplace that's also going to be fit for the future. Because I think future-proofing is essential, hey?
Absolutely.
But we don't really know what the future looks like, so that's the thing. So thank you very much. I'm going to bring this session to a close. Thank you all for logging in, for participating. Please use the app to rate the session and to fill in the post-event survey. And also you can go back to the homepage now to log in for the final session, which is going to be a really good one, because it's going to be a discussion between Eltron CEO Mteto Nyati with Gareth Cliff, about working now and leadership in a time of crisis. And since we've all been through a time of crisis, I think that's going to be a very interesting session. Thank you and goodbye.